Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lauren Abusamra, and today I want to talk to you about 3 different types of listening skills. Do you see what I see and hear what I hear when listening to others speak? Research suggests that you may not, as we as humans tend to habitually rely on different listening styles to interpret the messages we receive during a conversation or presentation. What ensures the message is received? What methods of presentation work best for you? Have you ever preferred one professor over another while one of your peers preferred the one that you did not? Was the teaching style different? Were they more in depth with content or more personal with you as a student? Knowing your type of listening skill can help you figure out how to communicate with other types of listeners. If we want to send and decode messages effectively, then that requires acknowledging different types of listeners. I have researched the topic of different types of listening styles using peer-reviewed academic sources. I have learned much information about the styles of listening, and I am excited to share 3 of these styles with you today. The 3 styles we're going to be talking about are people-oriented, action-oriented, and content-oriented listeners. Let's start with people-oriented listeners. According to Griffin and Bone, Invitation to Communications, people-oriented listeners are concerned about other people's feelings and emotions. They are also focused on the quality of the interpersonal relationship between speaker and listener. They are considered to be the most common type of listener based on 2 studies by Hemby and Brown and Associates. 40 to 60% of students at 2 different universities in different majors reported people-oriented listening as their preferred style. Females also tend to be more people-oriented listeners rather than their male counterparts, according to both Weaver, Brown, and Associates. There are many advantages to being a people-oriented listener. People-oriented listeners also tend to be more extroverted and less neurotic, according to a study by Weaver and Associates. Extroverted people tend to have more patience, confidence, and skill when interacting with other people. As a result of their extroverted tendencies, people-oriented listeners are more likely to be sympathetic and have empathy when talking with others. They seek out areas of common interest with others and are responsive to their emotions. Their increased extroversion makes them less apprehensive to present in groups, according to Griffin and Bone. One disadvantage of being a people-oriented listener is that sometimes they become too consumed about the interpersonal relationship, and that makes them lose the ability to think critically. Some tips for reaching people-oriented listeners is to be warm, friendly. Reassure the listener about the quality of the interpersonal relationship between you and them. Share personal examples and stories from your life, and that may help you connect with this type of listener. Moving on to our action-oriented listeners. These listeners tend to be all business. They listen specifically for information needed to complete a task, according to Griffin and Bone. They also tend to be more male rather than female. Action-oriented listeners, according to Weaver and Associates, tend to be more neurotic and less extroverted, leading them to process messages more emotionally on their end. They may even become frustrated or impatient more easily than other types of listeners. One advantage of being an action-oriented listener is that the listener can process information and draw conclusions quickly while working toward their goal. But some possible disadvantages of being an action-oriented listener is that the listener may become easily frustrated by disorganized presentation. They may not process implicit messages of the conversation, and they enjoy social interactions less than, say, your people-oriented listener, according to Brown and Associates. One tip for successfully reaching an action-oriented listener is to give a precise, to-the-point presentation that is completely free of error, staying focused on your main points and limiting any other types of distractions. Next, I'm going to talk about content-oriented listeners. Content-oriented listeners pay attention to the facts and the details of a message. They're looking to gather and analyze all the information available about an issue before making a decision, according to Griffin and Bone. Content-oriented listeners are fairly common second to people-oriented listeners. According to 2 studies of undergraduate students in different majors by Hemby and Brown and Associates, according to Weaver and Associates, content-oriented listeners are also more likely to be male rather than female, as with action-oriented listeners. This listening style is linked strongly with extroversion rather than neuroticism, based on findings by Weaver and Associates. These listeners seek areas of common interest with the speaker more often than getting caught up in their own emotions about the message. One advantage of being a content-oriented listener is that this type of listener seeks a deep understanding of a message, and they tend to be able to look at the information from all different angles and perspectives. But some disadvantages of being a content-oriented listener is that they may be unable to draw conclusions quickly, and the many questions posed by this type of listener could lead to tense interactions between speaker and listener, according to Griffin and Bone. Some tips for reaching content-oriented listeners include giving in-depth information and using peer-reviewed, credible sources. They rely heavily on fact-based information. Today, I have covered 3 types of listening styles or habits that we rely on to process the message of a presentation or conversation. The 3 listening styles we have talked about today are people-oriented, action-oriented, and content-oriented listeners. Tailoring your message to each type of listener can help you communicate more effectively with members of your audience. I gave some advantages, disadvantages, and tips today to help you do this successfully. Is one type of listener better than the other? Not necessarily, no. Studies show we tend to rely habitually on one innate style of listening more than the others. One style is not inherently better than another. However, being mindful of the advantages and disadvantages of each style can help us to listen and communicate with each other more effectively. And these are the works cited: credible, peer-reviewed sources for especially our content-oriented listeners. Thank you.